You're listening to Overwatch Contenders Daily, your path to daily news, scores, and insights into the Overwatch League stars of tomorrow. Here's your host, LemonKiwi.
Overwatch fans, happy Wednesday. This is Overwatch Contenders Daily, and I'm your host, LemonKiwi. Today's region of the day is Contenders Pacific. They're already going into their grand finals, so I've brought on very special guest, Contenders Pacific Commentator Pixie on the mic to tell me his reaction to the final results of the regular season. Things like, well, Blank Esports not looking as dominant as they were last season. Mega Esports, a team that was relegated that did very well last season. A team like Monster Shield Korea is coming from Open Division and taking the region by storm. So we're going to be talking everything from narratives to the matches in the quarterfinals and the semifinals with a bit of a prediction of the grand finals. But there's no Contenders news to go over today, so let's just get straight into my interview with Pixie. And I'm joined here with Contenders Pacific commentator Pixie, who I've brought on the show before. He's had an awesome season, and now playoffs are still underway going into the grand finals. But how is it going, Pixie?
Not too bad. I'm kind of enjoying the break for now.
Small break until LAN, which is actually kind of far away from now. But for you, those at home that, well, didn't get to catch Pacific Contenders so far, yes, we're already in playoffs, and those that made it are Monster Shield, Machi, Talon Esports, EXL, Cyclops Athlete Gaming, Hong Kong Attitude, Xavier Esports, and Blank Esports. Teams that were relegated include Paradigm, Mega Esports, Nova Esports, and Incipients. But, Pixie, I'm just going to start with an overview of the results. So the teams that made it and the teams that did not make it, who sort of surprised you and who disappointed you based on their past performances?
I think just, first of all, the groups. The teams that surprised in the bad kind of way, I would say Mega definitely falls into that camp. Like, they made semifinals last season. They've been playing contiguously since OPC Season 1. Back then, they were Fireball. They kind of only just avoided relegations in that season, and then every season since has got better and better and better. And every season, because of that, we've kind of gone, okay, you know, how far are they going to go this season? And given that last season they made it to a semifinal, it was like, all right, well, hey, maybe this time they make it to a final. Unfortunately, not so. And that was a bit of a shock, I think, them just going down, just kind of bottoming out, essentially 0-5. They may be able to make it back in. I'd like to think they can. They have an incredible amount of talent on that roster. It is almost entirely the same roster that has previously made like semifinals and sort of top placements within OPC Season 2. So it'd be a shame to see them go, really. But it's always a possibility.
Yeah, I remember speaking to you and Avril last time about Mega Esports, sort of that middle of the pack team that, you know, could they make that top 3 area? And now, well, that's not a thing. 3-17.
Yeah.
I have no idea what happened there. And then there's also Blank Esports that was sort of that, you know, the top 2 area. And now I feel like they're falling behind a little bit. Do you agree?
Yeah, it feels like a similar kind of thing, really. And again, I would say that's equally been a bit of a shock. They at least had enough success in their group to make it to playoffs. It's nice that they didn't have to completely get relegated. But even so, like, we weren't at all surprised when they lost in the playoffs, really. There was this notion of, like, maybe they can still come alive a little bit in playoffs. They do often rise to the occasion. And also, they do just play better on LAN. Like, I guarantee you if this season had been on LAN, this team probably would have, at the very least, had a much better time throughout the season. Hey, maybe they would have still lost out in the quarters or potentially the semis, but I guarantee they would have had a better time altogether. But also, it wasn't just ping that caused them to lose, right? Like, it's a factor, but the reality is they were also playing worse. Like, I think the thing that's important to note there, and this is actually equally important for Mega, like, this is kind of proof, as it were, that it's not just ping. Both Mega and Xavier are from Thailand. They're both playing on the same ping. Xavier made it to the semis, right? Like, ping is not the be-all, end-all of this, of these previous top teams suddenly just dropping through the standings. It is a number of other factors as well. In Blank's case, it also wasn't helped by the loss of Hulu partway through the season, and that flex tank role never quite got filled in any kind of permanent way. They had Kiki for the very first week, who was a former member, followed by a fella called Pekka, followed by a guy called Dragon Breath, who I believe is who they fielded in the quarterfinals as well. So they never like properly filled that role. They never really had like a lot of time with someone. So that also hurt them quite a lot when you consider that they only had that starting 6 for the first 2 weeks.
And you have this belly flop of Korean teams coming in and out. We have Detonator Korea that won the season, and then they just went MIA. They disappeared. I don't know. Good luck with their career endeavors wherever they ended up. And then you have Monster Shield Korea that comes in as this new dominant force from Open Division to now being considered one of the best teams, it seems, in the region. So what do you know about Monster Shield, sort of where they came from? Was this from another region, or...?
Monster Shield qualified under the name We Love Gaming Korea, and they have looked good for a decent amount of time. Just like coming through, I believe technically, I'm almost certain of this. They actually qualified for last season, but because it was on LAN, they couldn't actually get there. Same is actually true for Cyclops Athlete Gaming. They technically qualified for season 1, but they and a couple of other teams couldn't make it to the LAN setting. Which was a little bit unfortunate. But now that that's not a factor, those teams are actually able to make it in, which is kind of good to see. And We Love Gaming Korea looked like they would kind of follow that term we use being Royal Road, the same that Ardiant did, where they came in through the qualification for OPC Season 2, and then just was absolutely dominant the whole way through. And then Detonator Korea, similar story, slightly less dominant, but similar story. And they were kind of poised to follow that same narrative, but I think it really speaks to the level of play in the region, and like the fact that it's had some really strong teams come through in the past, I think has helped kind of push the level of these teams upward even further. So that story ended for Monster Shield Korea, and that's kind of the bulk of what there is to them. They were a good-looking team. They looked like they were going to make a similar splash, and now they haven't.
Yeah, you sort of spoiled the playoff results, but that's totally true. That I honestly
thought... already happened. That was...
I'm just kidding. We're totally getting to the playoff discussion of that. But yeah, I totally thought Monster Shield was going, just based on how their regular season results were going to go to grand finals, seem like a totally obvious one. But actually, let's go back and start with the quarterfinals. The results were Monster Shield did 3-0 Blank Esports, which was a big matchup in terms of names of Blank Esports getting out in the first round. Kind of unexpected. And you got Talon 3-1 over HKA, Cyclops Athlete Gaming winning in Game 5 over EXL, and Xavier Esports 3-0 over Machi. So there was probably a few surprises here, Pixie, but what took you by surprise here?
Well, first, I think I can only really speak by first giving some context, like kind of lay of the land here. So of note, Group A was incredibly close in that top 4. Outside of the top 4, the 2 teams we expected to go did both go. So the reality is with Group A, like right down to the very last week of play, actually, we still had a game to go between Machi had one last game, and then after that still was Talon versus Monster Shield Korea. This is the very last week of play. Machi won their game. That guaranteed them at least 2nd seed. And then whoever won between Talon and Monster Shield Korea would determine where Machi themselves finished. So I think it's quite important to note in there that Machi could have been that 1st seed out of that group. Talon could have been the 1st seed out of that group. Monster Shield Korea could have ended up 3rd seed out of that group. So, like, it's easy to look close at, oh, Talon versus Hong Kong Attitude. That's a 3rd seed playing a 2nd seed. That's an upset. But that's kind of not really getting the full picture, because the reality is Talon themselves could have potentially been a 1st seed at one point. Right back at the start as well. Like, from the get-go, it did look like Monster Shield Korea would be the top team out of that group. It wasn't too much of a surprise when they ultimately did get that point. But also, like, right out the gate, they lost to EXL. And also a bit of background there, by the way. EXL is the organization that took over Detonator's old spot. Detonator have moved out of Overwatch altogether. So those top 4 were actually all very close in terms of their skill level. Like, if you go back and watch that EXL Monster Shield Korea match, it was very close, but in every place where it mattered, EXL did seem like they were just kind of eking it out over the competition. So honestly, Talon beating Hong Kong Attitude, not that big a surprise. Monster Shield beating Blank, I mean, it's the first seed versus a fourth seed. That one, I mean, it only goes a certain way, and Blank were already looking shaky. I would say the genuine upset here was Xavier beating Matchy, because it wasn't just that they beat Matchy. Xavier looked decent coming into the playoffs anyway. They'd had a very good closing 2 weeks of the tournament. They'd really hit a stride, and it was sort of like a definitely don't sleep on this team kind of situation. But beating Matchy in a 3-0 was kind of nuts. The first match, unfortunately, was a forfeit from Matchy, the first game, rather, for those who weren't able to survive. They had an issue getting into the game, getting with their players ready. I'm not sure on what the exact details are. But beyond that point, it wasn't like, you know, it was this really close run affair and yada, yada, yada. Like, we still kind of assumed, like, okay, now that they're back in it, like, this is still very winnable for Matchy. You know, maybe this goes to a game 4. Matchy could still just win it here 3-1. The fact that the next 2 games were so Xavier dominant, and it wasn't even that Matchy looked particularly rattled, Xavier just looked that much better. That was the only result in this entire, at least results-wise, quarterfinals that I would say was a surprise. The CAG EXL one, I think the surprising thing, arguably, is that it was close. But again, I kind of have to revisit that notion of, like, all of the top 4 teams in Group A could have at one time been the number 1 team in that group. So it's not even that much of a shock. You can almost consider it to be on par with something like CAG maybe taking on Monster Shield Korea. That's a more dubious assertion to make, but like it's not as shocking as it might seem on the surface that like, oh, what? Like this first seed nearly lost out to the 4th place seed. Like that's not really appreciating exactly how close Group A was.
Was very close, and I mean, not only did CAG go to Game 5 once, they did it twice in semifinals, so I guess that's more of the shocking factor of they look so good from Group B, and maybe Group B, you know, Group A looks stronger, they're tighter, whatever, but CAG, that's 2 Game 5s in a row, so what did you think about the semifinals now? You have Monster Shield Korea losing to Talon Esports, and then you have Cyclops Athlete Gaming, again, Game 5 over Xavier.
I'm going to speak on the Cyclops Athlete Gaming one first because you said it yourself. They went to Game 5 twice. Both times went down to all tied up on Oasis and then onto Gardens. And for those of you unfamiliar, this squad is a lot of the Japanese World Cup team that lost to the Australian World Cup team last World Cup on map 3 of Oasis at the bottom of a series. So both times they went to Gardens and then won it in this situation.
Oh, wow.
And they're also, this exact roster of 7 players is now the Japanese World Cup squad for this year. So, like, it was almost poetic, right? It was kind of cute how it all worked out. But the fact that it went there both times, that's why I'm enjoying my break right now. Like, those were stressful matches to cast. And the reality with that match as well is it would have been an achievement either way, right? Like there is no result there that would feel bad except for a 3-0 where one team just absolutely gets rolled. And the reason for that, we sort of talked about this during the night as well. If Xavier had won, I mean, Xavier already bettered their previous season result, but if they won, they would have also had the best result of any Thai team in this region.
Oh, wow.
And when you consider that there's always been a Thai team in this region, that's actually quite an achievement. And then also, their finals is being played at the World Cup stage in Bangkok, in Thailand.
That would have been awesome.
They would have kind of had that home ground. It's like, it would have been so great for the, exactly. And also, like, I think all the fans out of Thailand are already very excited that they're getting a World Cup stage. It's kind of like Australia last year. Like, there's almost a bit of like senpai notice me, right? It's actually really satisfying, I think, for these countries that are having, like, they get like one kind of stellar breakout success team, and then they slowly start building on that to gain more and more of a reputation. And like in Australia, it's something that's been brewing across all esports for the last couple of years that feels like it's finally kind of coming there now, like into a more full fruition. And I would say Thailand is now getting that same treatment. So just like imagine how much cooler it would have been if it's also your like home contenders team, as well as your World Cup team, which is actually an amalgamation of both of those tight teams.
Like how NYXL was supposed to go to New York.
Plus a couple of other players.
Like when NYXL was supposed to go to New York and then that didn't happen.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. But at the same time, CAG has been such a compelling story to get behind because of the results of the previous Japanese team. So again, to kind of speak to the national side of this stuff, because I think that is quite relevant in the Pacific region. There's been now 4 Japanese teams with Cyclops Athlete Gaming being the 5th. Every single one of them has been relegated with practically no map wins whatsoever. I think in terms of sheer map wins, don't call me out on this because I haven't exactly fact checked it. I could be slightly wrong, but I do believe Yoshimoto got the most map wins of any of them. That might be incorrect purely because Season 1 OPC had 2 Japanese teams, one of which lost every single game they played. The other only won maps against the other Japanese team. So I think technically they might have more maps because of that. But that's still not a better result. You know, that's not actually as good as like taking some maps off the teams beating you. So for Cyclops Athlete Gaming to come in, and we've always said every time a Japanese team has bottomed out, we've said, look, this isn't the best Japanese team that could possibly exist. This isn't all the best players in one place with all the right stuff going on. This is not that team. Cyclops Athlete Gaming is that team. And that's why it's been so satisfying to see them get as far as they have. We already expected good things, and it would have sucked for us to say that and then end up being wrong. So there's a bit of vindication in that for me. But to see them getting this far and now also going all the way to the final, I mean, it's already an achievement for a Japanese team to not get relegated, let alone win their group, let alone do so without dropping a single match, let alone make it into a semifinal, and then also now into the finals beyond that. Like, it's so unprecedented, but it's also exactly what should have been happening with Japanese teams in the past. Like, if this had been, you know, the quote-unquote best Japanese team to exist, like, right from OPC Season 1, like, we'd be talking about them the same way we talk about blank, right? We'd be going like, yeah, this is like this long running, like, yeah, like Japan is this really like high quality known quantity in these specific tournaments. And that's how we would have been talking about this. So it's satisfying to see them finally kind of having their day, in the same sense that it's quite satisfying to see Xavier and then also just kind of Thailand, by extension, having a bit more of their day in this tournament as well. And I think a final note with that was also just incredibly satisfying with Cyclops Athlete Gaming taking out the win. A number of those members actually played on previous Japanese teams that were relegated.
So it's like the comeback year.
Exactly. So again, it just goes to show, you know, the whole is greater than the sum of its part, right? And I think as well for the team itself, like for those players, there is an amount of personal satisfaction and again, potentially vindication that comes with that. You know, like, I don't want to say they've been a laughing stock, but certainly there's been no reason to take a Japanese team seriously. And now there is. And they're always, you know, there always could have been a reason to take them seriously. We just never quite had that team. So now that we do, it's just, it's great for us, the viewers. It's great for Kevin and I, the casters. You know, this thing that we've been talking about for the last year and a half, we finally actually get to see it in game. And then also for the players themselves who are getting that personal achievement that they have just completely been unable to attain, that they've always had the ability to get. It's nice to see that actually happen.
Just to break that up, of just summarizing everything you just said, of how much I can appreciate Contenders Pacific, like looking at all these other regions, and why people at home should pay more attention to it, is because it's almost like a mini World Cup. You have all these regions battling for this sort of title in this area. You got Korea, you know, can everybody else beat Korea? But you got Thailand, you got Japan trying to make a name for themselves. I remember having an episode, was it either with you and Avril or one of the two, talking about who's going to be the flag that represent, or who's going to be the team that represents their region the best. You know, you had Cyclops Athlete Gaming under Japan, and you had Thailand, or sorry, I might have messed that up, but all these different regions namely coming in. And is it going to be still Korea that keeps taking Contenders Pacific? And now, instead of being Monster Shield or Detonator Korea, it's actually going to be none of those two, and it might possibly be Talon.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Talon. That's right. And actually, just as a quick note, that is, I have to say, one one of my favorite things about this region is more than any other region, we do kind of get that kind of, I don't want to say national divide, but purely because of language barrier, like a lot of these players can't even play with players of other nationalities. Even when English is common language, that's still quite limited. Like, very hard for a team from, say, Thailand to pick up, you know, a Korean player and a Japanese player and an Australian player. So teams are almost exclusively nation, except in the cases where two different nations do share a common language, such as with Hong Kong Attitude, who have a number of players from Hong Kong, and then also, I believe the majority are from Chinese Taipei. And it's one of the things I've always liked about it. And there's also this other tournaments below the level of are actually quite self-contained within a nation. So when you get the team that comes out into contenders, they tend to actually be the best representative of that nation, at least now. In the past, there were the issues of teams sometimes not being able to actually get to the LAN environment after qualifying. But now that that's not a factor, like Japan has all its tournaments, and then like the team that's the best is probably the one that will qualify for contenders. So you do get a little, I don't want to quite say mini World Cup, but you do get an aspect of that, you know, these are the best teams from these particular countries. And that means whenever a new one comes into contenders, that's a new strong team that's risen up out of that country's more localized scene. That's always really cool to see. But to speak to that other semifinal, Bristol one, that was the shocking result. That was the surprising result. So as much as we do say, for a time, all of these teams could have been the best team in PAC, it was Monster Shield Korea that took that honor, and they did so by beating Talon. It was a good series. It was a close series in some regard. It was also Monster Shield Korea, the two teams, unequivocally. So for Talon to come back just 1 week later and not just beat Monster Shield Korea, but 3-0 them, there is one tie in there, but aside from that, that is a 3-0 result. That's, I would say, the only result in this entire playoffs that felt genuinely unprecedented. Even Matchy versus Xavier, we went in going, don't sleep on Xavier. It was still a far better result than we expected in a theoretical, but we did expect some amount of Xavier win potential. We also expected it here of Talon, but much less so than what we ended up seeing. And I think that was one of our most exciting matches of the entire season, because in a lot of situations, in fact, the entirety of Control, just for example, we had exact mirror matchups, and it was Talon winning them, often only marginally. Like, you ever get those games? I love when where you're on Control and like two teams are running the same team comp, and you can only get this on Control due to its more symmetrical mirror. And they go in and like Team A wins the first fight and they get like 20% progress on the point, and then Team B wins the second fight and then they get 20% progress, and they're just kind of trading back and forth until finally the balance tips because one team wins 2 fights in a row. That was always Talon. And also they were getting just a little bit more percentage each time as well. So it was like this perfect numerical representation of the difference between these two teams. They could do exactly the same thing, and Talon was just doing it that little bit better until that breaking point came where they were winning the subsequent fight after getting control of the point, and then they'd win the map. And that was so exceptional because rarely do we get such a clear distinction between two teams. And when it's such a close match as well, into such good teams, it is such a treat to be able to watch. So that then going all the way to a 3-0 tells you the whole story. Talon is the better team. They weren't 2 weeks ago. They are now, and that's earned them the finals.
It's totally awesome to see how much they've changed from last season, because I remember, I think, speaking to Avril about last season of teams like Talon and Matchy Mega sort of being that middle pack, you know, could they ever be that top team? And then you look at them now and they're beating Korean teams. They're beating Blank Esports and really big names. And
Talon themselves are now a Korean roster, I should just add in.
For HKA, I meant wrong matchup. But the fact that they're being as dominant as they are, and they're in the grand finals. But now this moves us on to CAG versus Talon Esports in the grand finals. What do you think about that match?
I have a lot of thoughts, and none of them are exclusive. That's my best answer. A part of me almost, like, the part of me that's a gambling man, the part of me that that touches wood and avoids black cats. The superstitious part of me likes to think that we're going to a game 5 and we're going to be at the bottom of Oasis and then we're going to go to Gardens and CHE are going to win.
Oh, God.
But there's also the part of me that says, look, I really can't call this for the same reason that I haven't been able to call. Aside from Monster Shield Korea versus Blank, I have genuinely not been able to call any of these matches whatsoever. And that's the reality is all of our top 8 teams are actually quite close run. And on the day, any of them could be the better team. And that doesn't mean these teams are consistent. It just means there is this ongoing arms race between all of these teams, always pushing to get that little bit better. You see that no more directly than Talon beating Monster Shield Korea. It was, I would like to think, the loss that kind of sparked that extra little bit that then came out in the semifinal. It could really go either way. I know that feels like such a out, but it genuinely could go either way. And to make matters worse, it could go either way in any kind of result, right? I could totally see a world in which Talon come in 3-0. I could totally see a world in which CAG come in. I could see, I could see a full 5. I could see it 3-2. I could see all kinds of draws coming in there. I could, that's the thing with this playoffs is because of how it's all played out, because how close run have been, there is no metric right now. There is no comparative metric between these two teams, realistically. Now, you could try and look at it and say, actually, mistaken, Talon, and then Xavier beat Matchy convincingly. CAG beat Xavier closely, but then, hold on, Talon 3-0'd Monster Shield, and Monster Shield also bet Matchy. And then it just all starts to break, right? And then we're also starting to now, a month and a half into the past. And these teams have already changed so much in the course of 2 or 3 weeks. Shit that happened a month and a half ago just doesn't even. What actually matters is both of these teams were good enough in an incredibly close competition to make it to the finals. Now, if one team 3-0s the other, it doesn't. One group was stronger than the other. It doesn't mean that one group shat the bed. It means that other team just deserved to 3-0. And it could be a very similar situation. In fact, if it's a 3-0, I assume it would be a similar situation to what we had in that semifinal between Talon and Monster Shield Korea, where you have 2 incredibly close teams. But one is always coming out the better, if only by an inch, but it is that same inch each time.
But at least we hope that CAG don't go to another game 5, because then I don't think you can take
I
that
won't
casting.
Survive. You won't see me.
I think you'll actually die.
I'm certain of it.
And it'll be on land, so the players, you'll see them die on stage as well, which will be unfortunate. Because at least that takes away the whole ping situation.
Yes.
And then you instill this whole, well, it's on land. Have these players been on land before? I don't know a ton about them. Can they deal with that pressure of having the World Cup and stuff around them? I don't know if any of these players are playing in the World Cup at the same time, so, it'll be stressful.
Yeah, the ping thing actually is quite, that's kind of the great equalizer in this regard. The fact of the matter is teams have had better ping right now. The entire tournament is played on Taiwan servers. I don't like to talk about ping too much because I think it puts this idea in people's minds that it's the be-all end-all. I know I spoke about that earlier, just look at the 2 Thai teams. There's no better evidence that ping is not the be-all end-all of this tournament. But certainly it is a factor. And it will not be a factor in the playoffs. You can sometimes get this kind of reverse effect, actually, where a team is used to playing on lower ping, and then suddenly the high ping kind of catches them a little bit, and there's a bit of an adjustment period. It's unfortunate when that adjustment period is the entire series, but hopefully that doesn't happen to either of these teams. But to speak to the other part of that, the World Cup part of things, this, as I mentioned before, this entire roster for CAG is also their World Cup team. That may or may not include Coach XQQ. I need to check it up.
So they'll be playing in the World Cup and Contenders Finals.
Yes, and their World Cup league is in South Korea, in Seoul. Or Seoul or Busan. Someone's gonna yell at me on Reddit for not knowing that. Somewhere in South Korea. It's like those 2 major. Then it's gonna turn out that it's in Incheon altogether. Anyway. Shit, it might be actually. I was just reading about this.
We won't fact check you.
But yeah, so which is kind of, I don't want to use this as they can afford to lose, but they get a second shot to kind of prove their mettle internationally. If they lose one or the other, but win the other, then cool, awesome. Ideally, they win both. I would love to see this team make it out of their group in World Cup, and also win Pacific. I think that would shut a lot of mouths up, for one thing. Though I would like to think that most of those mouths have already been silenced. But if nothing else, again, you just got to go back to this sense of achievement. Like it's so groundbreaking, and it's so great to see this team finally here, because that is what it feels like. But on the other side of that, again, you've got to say, look, if it's Talon, they absolutely deserve it. This is an organization that were able to stay in last season, but not by much. And they've gone away, rebuilt their team. So this is a new batch of relatively, I don't want to say like unknown players or like nobodies or anything. They're not just like totally pickups, but like they're not the most known players across the board. And if they come in and they win it, then it's like awesome. And also for the players themselves, like if they win, it's not just because, lol, by Koreans, they're better. It's because this team got their shit together and played the best, right? Like, I think there's nothing better than a team of like I don't want to say 6 random pickups. That is by far an oversimplification, but like there's nothing better than seeing a team of 6 people like that come together and then win, right? Like there's like this dynamite thing, this sparks flying kind of thing that happens. I think that's really satisfying. And by the way, if you ever wanted proof that lol by 6 Koreans doesn't work, that's what Matchy did. Matchy struggled their way through last season and then also season 2 of OPC, having previously been one of the better teams. And they finally went, you know what, this isn't working. And I was also the first to say, like, look, whatever's going on here, this team isn't working right now. Maybe they need to replace players. Maybe there's something else that's going to go on. They went, well, this isn't working. Let's go ahead and buy 6 Koreans. And then they didn't make it past quarters.
The wrong Koreans then were by.
I mean, sure. And like, I don't mean to say that as like a slight against the, but certainly, like, again, I hope this kind of shuts some mouths up, the sort of people that go, like, lol, B-tier Koreans. Like, every Korean team that has won in Pacific has by no measure been B-tier because they won. If you want to see what a B-tier Korean team looks like, that was New Paradigm. They fucking bottomed out. Oh, wow. I would even argue Matchy now fall into that. They made it in. They actually did look pretty good, but also they did shit the bed in the quarterfinals. Like, an A-tier Korean team does not do that. So yeah, their whole Korean teams in Pacific is also a hairy situation. One I'm not too keen to unpack right now, and one that could probably have like entire episodes dedicated to it. But I do kind of hope that some of actually what's happened as a weird side effect of there being now 5 Korean teams in this tournament, at least in terms of the players on those teams, is people have now hopefully learned the difference between a team like Ardiant that comes in, destroys everyone, and then gets like half their roster picked up by Overwatch League and like the remainder picked up by top tier contenders teams around the world, and a team like New Paradigm. If people haven't learned the difference by now and they're still going, then they're probably not actually watching in the first place. They just like to, they like to say whatever Reddit says they should say.
Yeah, the whole Korean discussion, I mean, even happens in NA because there's, of course, a ton of Koreans starting to come into NA as well.
It's always going to happen because Korean players are good at esports. Like, there's an unavoidable fact. And
you're not
telling
wrong.
you something. Doesn't mean that other players aren't exceptionally good. Doesn't mean that other players aren't world freaking class. Like, we've kind of proved that, right?
Right.
But yeah, it is totally fair to say, like, on the whole, Korea produces more high-quality players than any other region. Well, but that doesn't mean they produce the only high-quality players.
Oh, no,
and it also doesn't mean that all their players are high-quality.
And now you have CAG representing Japan into the grand finals, and there's still a Korean team there, though. So it's still not the end of the Korean reign in Contenders Pacific.
Well, we could have seen an all-Korean semifinals. So I was personally quite glad to not see that. I was kind of expecting to not see that in one regard, just because, when you do the math on it, like if you've got a number of coin flip, air quotes there, playoffs, quarterfinals, they're not, it's unlikely really that they all come up Korean wins there. It's satisfying to see that that's not come to pass because I think it would have been much harder to silence those mouths. But that's not the world we live in. We live in the world where a Japanese team amazingly has made it all the way to the finals and could well win the whole thing and then could also get out of their group in the World Cup. I think we're in the best timeline.
So it could be a new banner coming in Contenders Pacific. We'll see, though. No jinx. So since Pixie can't come up with a prediction, it's going to be a good match. Let us know in the comments what you guys think the correct prediction will be, so then we can roast Pixie on the desk when he doesn't want to pick a team. I know, no bias. I don't know enough to even make a prediction myself. So if you're the expert and you don't know, then it must be a good match. So you guys should check this one out. I think it's a September 14th, but I mean, I'm in a wholly different time zone. So make sure you guys check out the Contenders website, OWPathThePro on Twitter, and make sure to follow my buddy pal Pixie, because he's going to be tweeting when he is going to be casting those finals. But thank you so much, Pixie, for coming on for this interview.
No worries. Always a pleasure.
All right, this was Overwatch Contenders Daily. I'm LemonKiwi, and we're going to see you guys next week.